My name is Rosemary Ellsworth, 72 years old, a retired elementary school teacher. For the past 5 years, I've lived alone in the pale yellow house my late husband and I bought in our 30s. The walls creak more now, almost as if they've grown tired of silence and have begun to speak on my behalf. After a lifetime of hearing everything and saying so little, I never imagined silence could roar this loudly. That Sunday morning, sunlight spilled gently through the kitchen window, brushing across the counter where a tray of fresh cinnamon rolls cooled. They were Abby's favorite. I had baked them the way I always did, soft, warm, filled with memory. I picked up the phone, not just to ask if she wanted me to bring them over, but because I was desperate to hear if she and Joel had finally set a wedding date. A year engaged, no announcements, no plans, just vague smiles, and offhand, "We're keeping it simple," each time I brought it up. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then Joel's voice, not Abby's. "Good morning, Joel," I said, startled. For a moment, he didn't answer. I caught sounds behind him, music, laughter, glasses clinking. In my mind, I saw them at brunch somewhere, Abby glowing beside him. Then his voice slid through, casual, amused, careless. "Oh, we tied the knot last weekend," he chuckled, as if he'd just mentioned the weather. "Nothing fancy, just for real family." My body went still, as though someone had reached inside me and pulled the cord from the wall. "Sorry?" I whispered, not because I hadn't heard, but because I had. "Yeah," Joel continued, unbothered, breezy. "Just something intimate. Abby didn't want a big deal. Courthouse, her dad's cousin, my mom. Very small." He paused, then added with a false kindness that cut sharper than cruelty. "Abby said you'd understand." Abby said I'd understand. The porcelain teacup trembled in my hand. A corner of a cinnamon roll broke off and fell to the floor. "Can I speak with Abby?" I managed. "She's napping," he said, a sly edge under his tone. "Long weekend." And then the line went dead. Just for real family. The rest of the day, I sat on the porch, staring at the forsythia bushes I had trimmed only yesterday, the same words circling like vultures in my mind. Birds chirped. A dog barked in the distance. A soft breeze rolled by. But I was inside a glass box now, like some forgotten exhibit in a museum, visitors glancing in, murmuring, "What a quaint little life." I had raised Abby alone after her father died when she was 10. I had worked extra jobs to pay for college, bought her first apartment, a brand new sofa I couldn't afford, and baked every birthday cake in the shape of whatever animal she adored that year. And now, just for real family. Joel had said it like a vow, like I wasn't the woman who had built every piece of ground Abby ever stood on. 2 days later, Joel messaged me again. His tone still breezy, but now edged with the faintest hint of demand. "Hey, Rosemary, just checking in. Looks like the mortgage payment didn't go through this month. Could you double-check that transfer? Bank says it's overdue." I sat at my dining table, phone glowing in my hand, and then, slowly, I smiled. My fingers moved, steady now, deliberate, as I typed back, "Oh, I thought you knew." And that was the moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about exclusion. It was about the moment you decide you will no longer be invisible. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden in your own family, listen closely, because what happened next is the story of how I found my voice again. Abby appeared from the kitchen wearing a soft blue blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She looked lovely, tired, but lovely. Her eyes met mine for half a second before she turned to the stove. "Dinner's almost ready," she said too brightly. "I made baked ziti, Joel's favorite." I caught the subtext. Not mine, not ours, his. Joel gestured toward the dining table. "Sit, please." I opened a nice Sierra. "It's from Paso Robles. You'll like it." I sat at the edge of the chair, smoothing my skirt. The seat cushions were new, firmer than before. The old ones had been hand-sewn by me the summer Abby moved in. She said they made the house feel like home. I glanced around. Not one photo from her childhood. No hint of the girl who once made me macaroni art with #1 mom in glitter glue. It was as though Joel had curated the space to reflect only the present and the future. The past, it seemed, was inconvenient clutter. We ate mostly in silence. Abby offered small talk, comments about the weather, about the neighbor's dog who barked too much, about a new coffee shop downtown. I responded politely, asking a few questions here and there, but she never met my eyes for more than a flicker. Joel, on the other hand, was quite talkative, too talkative. He asked about my garden, my part-time work at the library, even complimented the earrings I was wearing, an old pair Richard gave me on our 25th anniversary. It all felt like a performance, a display of civility to conceal what had already been decided. When we reached dessert, store-bought tiramisu on delicate ceramic plates, I finally looked directly at Abby. "You looked beautiful," I said gently. "In the photos." Her fork paused mid-air. Joel let out a little laugh, not unkind, but dismissive. Abby set her fork down without eating. "Mom," I leaned forward, keeping my voice soft. "I'm not asking for an apology, sweetheart. I just want to understand." Joel leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "It was a very small ceremony," he said. "We didn't want drama, just something simple, intimate. Just for real family," I murmured. His eyes met mine over the rim of his glass. He didn't blink. He didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a small smirk, so subtle it could have been mistaken for a twitch, and said, "Don't take it personally. It's a new chapter for us." A new chapter? As if the old one had been written in pencil, and he decided to erase every line that included me. Abby looked down at her plate. Her hands were clenched in her lap. She didn't defend him. She didn't defend me. The silence between us thickened into something unbearable. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. "Thank you for dinner," I said, rising slowly. "You don't want to stay for tea?" Abby asked, quickly, finally looking at me. Her eyes were red, rimmed. She wasn't wearing mascara. "I think it's best I head home." Joel stood too, still performing. "Let us know if you need anything," he said with a polished smile. I met his gaze. Likewise. Abby followed me to the door, lingering as I put on my coat. For a moment, it felt like she might reach out, might say something real, but she didn't. She just opened the door and let the night air rush in. "Drive safe," she whispered. I paused on the porch, turned to her one last time. "I always do." Then I walked to my car, climbed in, and sat with my hands on the wheel, heart pounding, louder than the engine. Inside, I had held my composure, but out here, in the cold quiet of the night, my vision blurred. Not from sadness, from clarity. This wasn't just a dinner, it was the laying of new boundaries, one plate at a bizarre time. 3 days after the dinner, I was pruning the lavender in my front garden when my phone buzzed with a notification. I wiped the dirt from my gloves, expecting maybe a forwarded cat video from Margaret down the street or another coupon from the bakery. Instead, it was an email from Joel. Subject, mortgage transfer. No greeting, no punctuation in the body, just a sentence, clipped and cool. Has the mortgage transfer been made? It's late. I stared at the screen. My fingers went cold despite the sun warming the back of my neck. I read it again, then a third time. There was no "Hi, Rosemary." No. "I hope you're well." No, "Thanks again for coming to dinner." Just a transactional nudge like I was a forgetful employee, behind on office paperwork. I didn't respond right away. I went inside, made tea I never drank, and sat in the bay window that faced the driveway. My home of 37 years, the house where Abby learned to ride a bike, where we buried Richard's favorite dog under the oak tree, where birthdays and heartbreaks and Sunday roasts had layered themselves into every creaking floorboard. And Joel wanted to know if the mortgage transfer had been made. It didn't make sense. This house was long paid off. Richard and I made our final payment the year Abby graduated high school. We even held a little ceremony, cut up the last payment slip, and had champagne in the backyard. I kept the original deed in a bained, fireproof box, tucked beneath old tax returns and birth certificates. No bank. owned this home. No bank should be waiting on anything. That night, I pulled the deed from the cabinet. It wasn't there. I emptied every file. I checked again. Nothing. I remembered clearly the last time I'd seen it 6 months ago when Abby had come over to help me sort papers. I hadn't thought much of it then. She said she wanted to help organize, maybe get ahead of any paperwork I might need to update in case something ever happened. Her words had been soft, her eyes nervous. I'd felt touched, even grateful. Now my stomach curled. The next morning, I drove straight to the county records, an office. The woman at the front desk had short gray curls and bright pink lipstick that reminded me of the Avon catalogues my mother used to collect. She greeted me kindly, looked up my address, and then frowned as she tapped her keyboard again. "Looks like the deed was transferred 6 weeks ago," she said to an Abigail Ellsworth. My knees went weak. I gripped the edge of the counter. I didn't authorize that. The woman gave me a sympathetic look. "You'll need to speak with the record supervisor, but yes, the property is now under her name, and it appears it's been listed as collateral on a new mortgage." I couldn't breathe. The walls of the office felt like they were inching inward, the fluorescent lights above humming louder than they should have. I asked her to print the documents. I sat in my car, hands shaking as I read through the paperwork. It was all there, my signature notarized, but I never signed these. The notary's name was unfamiliar. The form was dated on a weekend I distinctly remembered. Abby had brought over Chile, and Joel had stayed in the study, catching up on work. I remembered Abby asking me to sign a few papers that just needed Mom's confirmation for the trust, transition, and routine title clarification. I had signed what she gave me without reading closely. I thought it was to help her, to smooth things in case of emergency. She'd used words like future and security and simplify. I had wanted to believe I was helping. Instead, I had handed over the house. I drove home in silence, the folder burning hot in my passenger seat. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a delivery van parked across the street. A man was unloading flat-pack furniture. I stared at the crisp lawn, the hydrangeas I'd planted in spring, the curtains Abby had sewn as a teenager still hanging in the kitchen window, and I wondered how much of this had been a plan. When did it begin? The next morning, I sent Joel a reply. Subject, mortgage transfer. Dear Joel, thanks for your email. I'm not sure why a mortgage is in question, as the house has been paid off for years. However, I discovered yesterday that the deed is now in Abby's name with a loan against it. Since I was not aware of this, I'd appreciate clarity on how this came to be. Please don't mistake my silence for ignorance. Rosemary, I didn't hear back for 2 days. Then came a response. Brief dry. Subject, remortgage transfer. Hi, Rosemary. Abby, I thought you'd be okay with it considering your age and the fact that she'll inherit the house anyway. A loan is just to help us with a few upgrades. It's all in the family. That phrase again, in the family. The same family who excluded me from the wedding. The same family who smirked while serving me dinner on a table I once gifted them. The same family who now expected me to keep paying for a home I no longer legally owned. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I got up, walked to the mirror in the hallway, and studied my reflection. For years I told myself I was doing things out of love, signing papers, giving space, staying quiet, being flexible, but love without boundaries had turned into a ledger with only one name in the debtor's column. They may have the papers, but I had time and a memory that didn't forget. 4 days after Joel's last email, my landline rang. I was rearranging the tea tins in the kitchen cabinet, one of those quiet, idle morning tasks you do when the world outside feels far too loud. Earl Grey, peppermint, lemon verbena. I still bought Abby's favorite chamomile, even though she hadn't had tea in this house for months. The ringtone echoed through the stillness. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Rosemary. Hey, it's Joel. His voice was unusually upbeat, forced, like someone smiling through clenched teeth. Good morning, I said, placing the tin back in its place. Quick thing, he continued. Breezy. Just wanted to check. Has the mortgage payment gone through? It was due last Friday and I didn't see the transfer on the joint account. I blinked, letting silence stretch long enough that he added a nervous chuckle at the end. Did something go wrong with the bank or? I turned to the window. The light was hitting the roses just right, pink and heavy with dew. I had pruned them last weekend. Their roots ran deep. I assumed Abby had taken care of it, I said, lightly. Well, yeah, but you usually make the payment, he said as though it were the most natural thing. It's how we've done it for over a year now. He wasn't wrong. I had transferred the money monthly, automatically, quietly, without fail, even after they'd moved into the upstairs guest suite, even after the wedding that wasn't for me. I breathed in slowly. Joel, I said, my voice even, almost warm. Oh, I thought you knew. Knew what? That I stopped covering it 3 days ago after I saw the deed. The line was silent. I could almost hear him blinking. I'm sorry, he stammered. You and Abby used my home to secure a mortgage, I said, still watching the roses without telling. Me, without my consent. But he started, then paused, recalibrating. Abby said, You signed the paperwork. I did without being told what it was. That's not consent, Joel. That's deception. Another silence. I could hear him shifting in his chair or pacing. Maybe. He was in their kitchen, the one I'd paid to remodel 3 years ago. Well, I mean, you knew we'd be taking over the house eventually. It's not like it's a surprise, and you've always been generous. You're right, I said, cutting in gently. I have always been generous. He took that as encouragement. Exactly. So this is just part of the transition. The payment helps both of us, and I figured. But you didn't ask, I said. You didn't include me in the decision you took. Abby was under the impression that, no. Joel, I said softly. Abby wasn't under any impression. She made one, and you. He supported it. He was quiet again. I could hear the panic tightening in his back. Breath now. The cracks forming behind his controlled tone. Well, the payment is due. So are you saying you're just going to let it default? I let the silence bloom between us. Then I smiled just faintly as I repeated the words that had been forming in my chest since the moment I walked out of that records office. Oh, I thought you knew. His breath caught. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I let those 6 words hang in the air like the quiet chime of a wind bell after a storm, because there are moments when restraint is not weakness. There are moments when silence is the sharpest blade. And for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I wasn't cushioning their decisions or translating their disrespect into something more palatable. I was simply holding up a mirror. And Joel, it seemed, didn't like what he saw. He hung up shortly after, muttering something about needing to check with Abby. I set the phone down gently and returned to my tea tins. Everything looked the same, but something had shifted. My hands no longer trembled when I reached for the kettle. My breath was steadier. The silence of the house no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. I made a cup of chamomile. Not for her, for me. It was Nora who knocked on my back door. That Saturday morning, holding 2 mugs of black coffee and a face full of concern. I hadn't seen her since the roses bloomed, and I'd just been about to pull the weeds near the fence when her gentle tap brought me back indoors. I figured you hadn't had breakfast, she said as I let her in, and you look like you could use a neighbor. She wasn't wrong. I hadn't eaten much since the wedding conversation, and my kitchen table had become a quiet battlefield of unopened mail and cooling cups of tea. We sat in silence for a flush impossible moment, steam curling between us. She was the only person left who called me Rosie without asking first. You've been on my mind, she said finally, setting her mug down with a soft clink. I saw Joel's car in your driveway last week. He didn't wave. He's not much for waving, I said, managing a half smile. She tilted her head, brows knitting. Rosie, I don't want to overstep, but something's off. You okay? I could have brushed it off, could have smiled, and you changed the subject, but there was something in her voice that cracked open the shell I'd been building around myself. I found out they used the house to refinance a mortgage, I said quietly, without telling me, and I only discovered it when the payment went late. Nora's face went still like a pond surface when the wind stops. They what? They added my house as collateral, and I only realized it because Joel called asking why I hadn't transferred money to cover the payment. She leaned forward, eyes sharp now. Have you checked the title? I assumed it was. Still in my name. I mean, it was always mine. Charles and I bought it after our second anniversary, paid it off by the time Abby was born. Rosie, she said, her voice a notch lower. Assuming won't help you now. You need to check. People can be added to titles, especially with refinances. I looked down at the rim of my mug, suddenly remembering Joel's offhand comment weeks ago. Something about needing me to sign a few papers for insurance purposes related to the property. I'd been making soup. I'd signed quickly. You're saying Joel could have? She nodded grimly. People do it. All the time. Add a name. Co-ownership makes it easier for banks to approve loans. But if you didn't know exactly what you were signing, I swallowed. My fingers itched toward the drawer where I kept old records, though I knew whatever. Wouldn't include anything they'd done behind my back. I'll go to the records office on Monday, I said, the words tasting heavy. Nora reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Do it. Quietly. Don't let on. Just know what you're standing on. That night, I barely wrote her. And slept. I pulled out Charles's old filing box and sat with it on the floor, combing through mortgage histories, insurance letters, and old tax documents. Everything I touched had a memory tied to it. The first payment stub, our final check before the mortgage burned. The ink had faded, but I remembered every detail. 6 months ago, that's when the refinance must have happened. Abby had mentioned something, vague then, about exploring financial flexibility now that they were planning for the next phase. I hadn't questioned it. I'd been too focused on whether she'd let me help pick out flowers for the wedding. I thought about the way Joel avoided looking me in the eye lately, the way Abby suddenly forgot to mention updates about their life. I'd blamed it on stress, on wedding planning, but it was something else. By Monday morning, I was at the county recorder's office when the doors opened. The clerk was polite, a young woman with efficient fingers and a soft voice. I handed over the property address and waited. She returned in less than 10 minutes, carrying a folder that felt heavier than it looked. You requested the current title and refinance documents? I nodded. She slid the folder toward me and then paused. You're Rosemary Ellsworth, correct? Yes, her. Expression shifted ever so slightly from neutral to something sympathetic. I'll give you a moment. I opened the folder. There it was, clear as daylight. 6 months ago, Joel Andrews had been added as a co-owner of the property. The signature next to his name was mine, dated and notarized. He had walked into the calm-sired walk at the bank with a document that bore my name and handed over the deed to the home where I'd raised my daughter, and I had helped him do it. Not knowingly, not willingly, but it didn't matter now. Joel Andrews legally owned half my house. I stared at the paper, my breath stuck somewhere between fury and shame. Nora had been right. I didn't know what I was standing on, but I would. Very soon that evening, after Nora left and the title paper sat still and damning on my kitchen table, I walked down the narrow hallway to my bedroom, my steps as slow as if I were walking into a room I no longer owned. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I went straight for the bottom drawer of Charles's old writing desk, the one he'd used, until his hands grew too shaky to write checks or sign letters. The drawer stuck halfway. It always had. I wiggled it loose with a heel of my palm and reached in past the dusty envelopes and silver fountain pens he loved, until my fingers brushed the dotty, leather-bound folder, maroon worn at the corners, our initials in gold leaf, still intact. CNR Ellsworth. I carried it to the bed like it was holy. Charles, had always said, "When in doubt, Rosie, check the documents. Love is for the heart, land is for the lawyer." I used to laugh. Now it just hurt how right he'd been. I unzipped the folder and opened it on my lap. There were layers of paper inside, each with a different weight, a different memory. The will, notarized in Oregon 2 years before his stroke. The trust agreement, a letter to Abby, another to me, and clipped inside. The front pocket, a page marked Survivor's Control Clause, property and trust, assets. I remembered when he'd added that we were in Bend, visiting his brother. Charles had just finished reading a book about generational wealth and estate planning, and he'd been quiet on the drive back. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with tea, he brought it up. "I want you to have full control, Rosie. Not just the house, everything after I'm gone." But I thought, the trust already, it's joint now. We both signed off. But I want a clause that gives you final authority just in case someone tries something later. I know how charming people can be when they smell opportunity. I remembered teasing him. Planning for war, General Ellsworth? He'd smiled, tired but proud. Planning for your peace. That clause was there right in front of me, signed by both of us. It granted the surviving spouse sole authority to override or veto any financial move involving trust. Linked assets, including real estate, upon Charles's death. But at the bottom of the page, my heart caught. In order to activate the survivor's control, the merit stated Betrayal. Surviving spouse must file a trustee transfer notice with the Ellsworth family trust attorney within 12 months of the decedent's death. 12 months. Charles had been gone 13. I stared at the sentence, reading it again and again, willing it to change, willing time to fold in on itself. But it didn't. I had missed the window by 1 month. 1 month. The pain hit like a stone underwater. Not fast, not sharp, but steady, pulling me down with it. I closed the folder slowly, like putting a baby to sleep, and pressed it against my chest. I had been so wrapped in grief after Charles passed, planning the memorial, settling accounts, helping Abby through the loss of her father, that I hadn't thought to activate anything. We had trusted the structure would protect us, that signatures meant security, that trust meant safety. But legal structures don't weep at funerals. They don't remember what was said over tea. They don't understand promises, whispered between pillows. They obey deadlines. I stood up, folder still in hand, and crossed to the mirror above my dresser. There I was, a widow, a mother, a woman who'd paid off her home, raised a daughter, kept the lights on, the cupboards full, the Christmas lights, strung year after year. And yet here I was, outmaneuvered by timing, by trust, by people who'd used that trust like a crowbar. I set the folder on the dresser and opened the second drawer where I kept old photographs. I found one from the summer of '99, Charles and I in front of the rose trellis he built for our 25th anniversary. Abby was holding the hammer for him. Her face had dirt smudges and the brightest smile that day. She'd said, "I want to marry someone just like Dad." I traced her image with my fingertip. Somewhere between that photo and today, something had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe I just hadn't wanted to see it. I replaced the photo and closed the drawer. The house was quiet. Not even the creak of pipes or hum of the refrigerator. Just silence and the weight of what I now knew. I hadn't activated the clause. I hadn't protected the trust. And Joel, he hadn't wasted time stepping in to fill the space I left. But the story wasn't finished. Charles's voice echoed in my memory, calm and certain. When in doubt, Rosie checked the documents. I had, and now I would check everything else. The office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, the kind of place where old money met old law. I hadn't been to see Mr. Caldwell in over 5 years, not since Charles's stroke. We drafted updates to the estate plan then, making sure everything was in order, so I thought. He stood when I entered, a tall, thin man with spectacles too far down his nose and a gentleness in his eyes I hadn't expected. "Mrs. Ellsworth, he said, shaking my hand. Or may I call you Rosemary? You'd better. I smiled, trying to feel braver than I was. I'm afraid I've come with a mess. He nodded, ushering me to the seat across from his desk. That's usually when people come to lawyers. Let's take it piece by piece. I placed the maroon folder on his desk, opened it to the clause Charles and I had signed, and pointed to the sentence that had haunted me for nights now. I missed the filing deadline by 1 month, I said. The survivor's control clause. He scanned it carefully, the kind of careful that meant something, not just reading for the words, but for the spaces between them. You're right, he murmured. Technically, the deadline has passed, but not all is lost. That surprised me. He tapped the edge of the document. This clause applies to direct control, but it doesn't remove your rights as a living trustee. And more importantly, it doesn't supersede existing codes in the Oregon trust law that allow a review of transfers under potential undue influence. Undue influence, I repeated, given your age, your status as surviving spouse, and the recent changes to the property title. If those occurred without clear, documented consent from you, and especially if financial gain was involved, we can open a formal review. That buys us time and leverage. I blinked, holding my breath for a second. Too long. I thought I was stuck, I whispered. That I'd lost everything. Charles meant to leave to me. You haven't, he said simply. But we'll need to move smart. No drama, just documentation. I nodded slowly, and then I remembered something else, something that had seemed strange at the time, but now noted at me with new clarity. There was a call, I said. Months ago, maybe 6. Someone from the Medicare planning division said they were updating eligibility files, wanted to send a form about mental capacity status in case I needed future assistance with a state transition. I thought it was odd, but I told them no thank you and hung up. Mr. Caldwell stiffened. They asked to send a mental capacity form over the phone. I nodded. He pushed his chair back slightly and reached for a file cabinet behind him. That is not a standard outreach. Not unless you requested it first. He pulled out a thick binder labeled Protective Fraud, Cases, Seniors, and opened it. This happens more than you'd believe, he said. A relative, usually someone who stands to gain, pretends to be from a state agency. They offer a capacity evaluation, often under the guise of Medicare or Veterans Affairs. If the elder signs, they try to use it later to argue diminished capacity in financial matters. My hands curled slowly in my lap. Are you saying, Joel? I'm saying we request the call records, Mr. Caldwell said, already scribbling on a legal pad. And we subpoena the number if necessary. If we prove misrepresentation, it discredits any financial agreement signed afterward, even if you had signed anything, which you didn't. I sat back in my chair, the air in my lungs, suddenly cold. He never said a word, I whispered. He helped carry Charles's casket. He gave a eulogy about family loyalty. And then behind closed doors, people grieve differently, Mr. Caldwell said carefully. But some people don't grieve at all, they just calculate. He handed me a list of documents. We'll need copies of your ID, tax filings for the past 2 years, utility bills in your name, and any bank statements that prove consistent residence and financial activity at the property. We'll also pull title history, loan documents, and trust distribution records. I reached for the list. And if Joel tries to contest, then he does so publicly, Mr. Caldwell said, which means we request a court-appointed fiduciary audit. If he's confident he did nothing wrong, he won't object. But if he did, this is the last thing he wants. There was a strange peace in that. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't threatening. I was documenting. I also want to draft a freeze notice, I added, on the property. I don't want him refinancing again, or selling anything while this is pending. Smart, Caldwell said. I'll have the paperwork ready by Friday. We stood and I felt taller than when I'd come in. At the door. He paused. One last thing. Has Joel ever discussed your health or decision-making with anyone? Has he asked for a conservatorship or financial oversight? No, I said. then paused. At least not to me. He nodded solemnly. Then let's make sure he never gets the chance. I stepped out of the office and into the September sunlight, my bag heavier with papers, my chest lighter with purpose. Charles had built the house, but I would defend it. And this time I would not miss a single deadline. I saw Nora again 2 days after my meeting with Mr. Caldwell. She was watering her potted lavender when I stepped out to collect the mail. Her wide-brimmed sun hat shaded her eyes, but her voice carried across the fence, low and cautious. "Rosemary, do you have a minute?" I nodded and walked over, mail forgotten in my hand. She didn't beat around the bush. I was talking to Lou, my cousin from the bank. I didn't say anything specific, but I mentioned how strange it was the way Joel and Abby had been maneuvering. I stayed silent, letting her go on. He said something odd about an account that Abby's mother co-signed on a savings fund that had large deposits every other month starting last year. Apparently, Joel set it up, said it was for unexpected medical expenses. But Lou thought it was unusual because the source account had your name on it. My heart gave a strange kick. "My account?" I asked. Nora nodded. "It looks like the money was transferred into the savings, then moved again, all under family care. Withdrawals. But here's the thing. Lou checked the address on the transfers. It was your home address listed as the origin point, not Joel's, not Abby's, yours." A quiet nausea settled in my stomach. I'd always trusted my online banking notifications, but Joel had once insisted I let him help automate some of my payments. "Less stress for you, Mom," he'd said. "We'll set up monthly reminders." I never thought to ask what else he connected. I went inside, closed the blinds, and sat down at the dining table with my laptop. I opened my checking account and scrolled back 6 months, then 9. There they were, transfers labeled Care Fund and Medical Support. Some were $400, others over $1,200, always to the same routing number. I copied the number, then opened my messages with Abby. I searched the digits and found it listed once in a text she sent nearly a year ago when I offered to help her cover physical therapy after her ankle surgery. "This is the savings account Mom helped me open just in case," she'd written. Joel said it's better than Venmo. So, that account still existed, but the text hadn't aged well. Abby's recovery had ended months ago. She was back at the yoga studio teaching 3 times a week. There were no ongoing medical bills, none that I'd been told about, and yet the transfers had continued. I called my bank's fraud line. The representative confirmed the setup. Recurring transfers linked to my account authorized under the guise of shared family management. "Is there any document that shows I signed for this?" I asked. "No, ma'am," she replied. "We show a verbal authorization, logged from your number." The representative noted a male voice confirmed identity by last 4 digits of Social Security. I froze. Joel knew that number. He'd helped file Charles's life insurance paperwork. He even kept a copy of my ID just in case, he'd said. After the funeral, I asked for a full transaction history to be emailed. Then, I stared at my screen and felt the bile rise. Slow, deliberate, disguised as kindness. That was how it always started, with the soft poisoning of boundaries wrapped in concern. A week after Charles died, Joel had brought over a folder of resources. "You might want to set up some estate backups," he'd said, "in case the hospital bills come through late." He'd been gentle, efficient, almost touching in his paniment. Attentiveness. Now I saw it for what it was, conditioning. Each helpful gesture had paved the way for silence, for my compliance, for invisibility. He hadn't needed me to sign anything dramatic, just small permissions, little nods, one transfer at a time. When I finally confronted Abby, I chose the quietest moment possible. She had dropped by to return a mixing bowl. I invited her in, offered tea, and opened my laptop without a word. I turned the screen toward her. "I'd like you to look at this," I said. Her eyes scanned the list. Her face changed barely, but enough. "I didn't know it was still connected," she said softly. "Did you?" know Joel was using my social security information? She opened her mouth, closed it. He said you'd agreed that it was mutual. Did I ever speak to you about transferring over $9,000 in less than 10 months? So where did the money go? She looked away. Some to the studio, some to our mortgage, and some to my mom for her treatments. Treatments? She's been going through back surgery consults. Insurance didn't cover it all. I nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she said, her voice shaking. We never meant to hurt you, Joel said. You were part of it. I stared at her. You wanted to build a life, Abby and I. I wanted to help, but not like this. Not without honesty. I'll talk to him, she whispered. We'll return it. I shook my head. No, I said quietly. You won't. I've already opened a formal case. The bank will handle it now. She looked stunned. Not angry, just small. The kind of small I'd once felt when Charles's diagnosis came, and no one. I knew what to say. Except this time I knew exactly what to say. This isn't about the money, Abby, I said. It's about the erosion, the kind that starts with one borrowed dollar and ends with stolen trust. She stood to leave, her eyes glossy. I did love you like a daughter, I added, and I hope someday you understand why I had to stop pretending. When the door closed behind her, I sat down in the stillness. My ad account was lighter, but I finally was not. I had just settled into the sunroom with a cup of peppermint tea when the chime rang at the front door. Through the leaded glass, I saw a familiar silhouette, poised, upright, tailored in beige and pearls. My heart gave a small lurch. It was Mrs. Pierce, Joel's mother. We hadn't seen each other since Charles's memorial, not once during the planning of the wedding or the so-called celebration that never included me. And yet, there she stood, gloves on, a small tin of almond cookies, tucked neatly under one arm like we were old bridge partners. Rosemary, she said, lips curved into a soft, restrained smile. I was just driving through and thought I'd stop in. We haven't spoken in ages. I stepped aside and nodded. Come in. She moved with the precision of someone who practiced grace. For sport. Her eyes scanned the foyer, then the hallway, pausing just a beat too long on the family photo that no longer included Charles. Only me, Abby, and Joel taken 2 Thanksgivings ago. She said nothing. We sat in the living room. She declined tea, offered me a slasher cookie. I declined it. She folded her hands in her lap. How have you been? The transition must feel surreal. I tilted my head. Which transition is that? Widowhood, or watching my daughter get married without so much as a text? Her smile held. I meant adjusting to the quiet. Empty houses can echo. I gave no answer. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if discussing matters of state. You know, Rosemary, I've always respected your composure, especially after Charles passed. You handled the estate details with dignity. That's not always easy, especially for women our age. So many let emotions cloud their decisions. I met her eyes, calm and unreadable. Is that what brings you here? Estate details? She let out a soft laugh, smoothing the crease of her slacks. Well, in part, I received some notifications, routine of course. As co-trustee on a few of Charles's accounts, I still receive access to certain filings, old titles, property records, things of that nature. I said nothing, waiting, she continued. It appears that the refinance paperwork on this house was processed through a bundle, one that included a clause tying Joel into partial ownership. Just a fraction, of course, but still binding. There it was, the real visit. I set down my teacup. Joel, I said slowly, was never part of the original deed, and Charles never authorized any such clause. You and I both know that. She lifted her brows with a delicate shrug. Intent can be murky, especially when grief enters the equation. I'm not saying anything was done improperly, of course, but from a practical standpoint, things are shifting. My fingers rested on the edge of the armrest. She leaned in just a little more, and with Abby, Being his wife now, you can imagine how confusing it might be for them if decisions are delayed. They're trying to build a life, Rosemary. A home, a future. I stared at her. She added, Joel mentioned they were willing to take over some responsibilities. Lighten your load, especially now that things like upkeep, taxes, repairs, well, they can pile up. And who would hold the title? I asked. Her tone didn't waver. Technically, it wouldn't need to change immediately, but a formal transition would ensure clarity for everyone involved. A pause passed between us, thick as fog. Then she smiled again. It's not about taking anything from you, dear. It's about preparing, ensuring that Abby doesn't face unnecessary obstacles when the time comes. When what time comes? She blinked, then softened her voice. Let's not pretend we're immortal. None of us are. Charles had the foresight to name you as his primary, yes, but long-term continuity, that's something else entirely. I stood up. She remained, seated, perfectly composed. Let me be very clear, Diane, I said. This house was built on my husband's labor and my devotion. Joel did not inherit it. He circumvented a legal pathway with deception. And Abby, she's not a victim in this, Mrs. Pierce finally rose, adjusting her coat sleeve. You're entitled to your perspective, and I'm entitled to my home. There was a flicker, then just a glint in her eyes, a quiet warning. You're a thoughtful woman, Rosemary. I only hope that when the time comes to sign what needs to be signed, you'll do so with grace. For Abby's sake, I walked her to the door. Just before she stepped outside, she paused. I've always admired your poise, she said. It would be a shame to see it hardened by bitterness. I opened the door. Better, bitter than blind. She stepped out onto the porch, her heels clicking against the stone. She didn't look back. When the door closed, I didn't move for several minutes. I simply stood in the foyer, staring at the cookies she left. Behind, almond, Charles's favorite. Not mine. I threw them straight into the trash. The day after Diane Pierce left my doorstep with her tin of stale sweetness and veiled threats, I made my list. It was a short list, but every item on it had sharp teeth. The locksmith came first, a man named Dennis, mid-50 seconds, kind eyes, no questions. Asked. I walked him through every door, front, side, sunroom, garage, and told Tim plainly, change everything, dead bolts too, and add one to the basement, just in case. He didn't blink. Good choice, ma'am. Old locks are like open secrets. By sundown, every key in the house was mine. Abby and Joel still had their copies. Old ones. Let them try those next time they came. Let them jiggle the knob and feel the cold click of rejection. Then came the cameras, discreet, wireless, cloud-based. One above the garage, two at the side gates, one at the front entry, another inside, tucked above the bookshelf facing the living room. I placed it there after finding out that Joel had entered once, without knocking, claiming he'd left something in the garage months back. I hadn't questioned it then. Now I questioned everything. That night, I opened a new checking account under my own name at a small regional bank. Joel wouldn't think to search. I moved all recurring deposits there, Social Security, pension, and Charles's remaining investment yields. I made sure not a cent of it bled into the joint account Abby once had access to, the one I had set up in the hopeful days when she first called me Mom. Hope is a dangerous thing when it's placed in the wrong hands. Then the documents. I took out the thick folder from Charles's cabinet, blue leather, gold lettering, the seal from the estate attorneys, office embossed at the corner. I flipped through every page, the living trust, power of attorney, survivorship clause, ownership titles. Then I made copies, color front and back, and stored them in 3 places. One in my fireproof safe, one in a lockbox at the bank, and one with Mr. Caldwell's office. I asked Mr. Caldwell to update all signatures, replace Charles's old authorizations with mine, remove co-rustees, transfer all remaining authority to me as surviving spouse. He nodded without fanfare, but his eyes carried respect. I didn't need sympathy. I needed certainty. I wanted ironclad, I told him. So if someone tries to slide a paper under my hand, I'll know which hand to slap away. Understood, he said, and he did exactly that. At home, I pulled out every file folder from the armoire in the guest room. Financial, statements, receipts, loan confirmations, notarized letters. I color-coded each one, labeled them by year and relevance. I shredded duplicates and saved digital copies on a USB drive I wore around my neck, under my blouse. Abby once teased me about my habit of keeping paper records, said everything should be on an app. I smiled. Back then. I don't smile about it now. On day 4, I went into the attic. The same attic where Charles used to keep old tax boxes and hunting gear he hadn't touched since his knees gave out. In the corner was the antique steamer trunk my mother had brought from Ohio in the 1,940 seconds. I opened it and placed 2 things inside: the original trust documents and the first letter Charles ever wrote me in college when he asked if I wanted to skip town and start a life with someone who had dreams bigger than his wallet. I placed them beneath the quilt and locked in the trunk. Not everything needed to be easy to find. In the evenings, I walked the perimeter of the house with a flashlight and my phone. I checked the camera feeds. I took mental notes of tire tracks, moved flower pots, shifted garden stones. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The difference is power. I started speaking with Nora daily. She brought coffee most mornings and pie on Saturdays. We talked about her late husband, about Abby when she was still a teenager helping at the church pantry, about how little things could bloom into bigger things when you looked away too long. Don't ever underestimate your calm, Nora told me once, sipping her brew. It unsettles people who thrive on noise. I liked that. It stuck. Each step I took, I did in silence. No declarations, no revenge speeches, just preparation, just stewardship of my own life. They thought they'd caught me in fog, but I'd always known the layout of this house better than anyone. I knew where the shadows fell and which creaks meant wind or something else. I knew which drawers stuck when it rained and where Charles used to stash old silver in case we had unexpected guests. Now I was the unexpected guest in their plans. I whispered something to myself one night as I locked the back gate. The wind had picked up and I could smell the pine from the woods beyond the yard. The only door they could walk through is the one I leave open, and I wasn't leaving anything open anymore. The first message came on a Wednesday morning just after I finished watering the hydrangeas. Hi, Rosemary. Just wondering if we could talk. I think there's been a lot of miscommunication, and I really want to clear the air. It's important for all of us. There was no mom, not even a hi, it's Abby. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before locking the phone and slipping it into my apron pocket. I finished tending to the hydrangeas. They had always bloomed better when I didn't rush. The second message arrived an hour later. I know you're busy. I feel like things got off track. Joel and I both feel it. We never meant for you to feel left out. Still no apology. Just soft words wrapped in gauze meant to muffle rather than mend. By mid-afternoon, there were 5 messages. One had a photo attached, an old picture of Abby and me at the lake the summer before her engagement. I remember I had packed her sandwiches with the crusts cut off the way she liked, though she never thanked me for them. She had hugged me in the water, laughing. The caption under the photo now read, "I miss this." I didn't reply. I just saved the picture into a folder on my phone, labeled before. The messages didn't stop. They came in bursts, morning check-ins, midday reflections, late, night regrets that still tiptoed carefully around accountability. I know things haven't been perfect, one read, but can we try again? Joel's been under so much pressure lately. That line caught me. I opened my laptop and logged into one of the real estate listing sites I'd bookmarked. I typed in Joel's name. The second property on the list had a big red banner across the image, pending foreclosure. It was a condo, downtown. They had tried to flip. High ceilings, minimalist staging, overpriced. I kept reading. The same property was listed under a shell company tied to Joel's name. There was another, An empty lot near the lake. No permits filed, no buyers, just debt. 2 clicks later, I found a business news. Alert. Joel had been one of 4 names listed in a small venture capital group that had just gone under. High risk, high yield, the article said, but in this case, all risk, no yield. And Abby, a quick search through LinkedIn showed her profile had been updated to freelance consultant, a euphemism these days for recently let go. Xiao. The 7th message came just as I closed my laptop. I know things are tense, but we love you. You mean a lot to both of us. I think if we could just sit down face to face, maybe over dinner. I know Joel. Ever would be happy to see you again. Happy to see me? After siphoning my name off, property titles, rerouting funds into accounts I never touched, rewriting the story of our family and paperwork filed. Behind my back, I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone loosely in my hand. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, I imagined replying just a line, maybe even a question, something to give them a thread of hope, but instead, I clicked delete one by one. Each message disappeared, soft tones from the phone as I erased them, not out of cruelty, but clarity. I didn't owe them access to my peace. The last message was short, just one line. We heard from Diane you've been keeping to yourself. Joel says he's worried. I looked out the window at the dusk light spilling across the lawn, the same lawn they used to run across when they visited, barefoot tossing keys on, the kitchen counter without asking, as if the house were already theirs. I got up, poured myself a cup of tea and sat in the reading chair by the fireplace. I hadn't kept to myself. I had kept myself safe. That's a very different thing. Let them wonder what I was doing now. Let them sit in their silence and call it confusion. I wasn't disappearing. I was becoming visible again, just in places they never bothered to look. That night, I wrote a note to myself on a yellow sticky pad and placed it on the fridge. They only text when they think you've forgotten, and I hadn't forgotten a single thing. It was a Friday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I hadn't been expecting anyone, not the mail carrier, not Nora, not a neighbor selling school raffle tickets. I opened the door and found a man in a beige blazer, carrying a leather folio and smiling in that way people do when they expect compliance. "Mrs. Ellsworth?" he asked, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "Yes?" I kept my hand on the latch, only partially opening the door. "I'm Dr. Brandon Keel. I'm a licensed psychological evaluator. I'm here for a wellness check-in." I blinked, not moving. I didn't request one. No, of course not," he said quickly. "This is just a routine screening. Your family expressed some concerns recently. Nothing alarming, just a standard cognitive wellness protocol for seniors. I promise this won't take long." He smiled again, too, warmly, the kind of smile people put on when they're paid to disarm you. I looked at his folio. A stack of pre-filled forms peeked out, not a clipboard, not a pen, ready to take. Notes from my answers, just pre-written assumptions dressed as paperwork. "Who sent you?" I asked. He gave a well-practiced shrug. "I work with several family legal representatives. It's all confidential, of course." I opened the door a little wider, but not to let him in, just enough to slip my phone into my pocket and hit record. I'd prepared for this. I invited him inside, offering him the armchair by the bay window, the one Abby once curled into to read magazines. I sat across from him, notepad in hand. "You don't mind if I take notes, do you?" I asked. He gave a polite chuckle. "Of course not, but this really is informal." He began with simple questions. "Do you remember what day it is? Who's the current president? Have you found yourself forgetting people's names lately?" I answered clearly, deliberately, my tone neutral. I gave him nothing to work with. He flipped to a new page. "Can you tell me about your current living situation?" I tilted my head. "In what sense? Are you living alone by choice? Do you feel safe managing your finances? Are you receiving assistance for meals, appointments, that sort of thing?" The questions were phrased as concern, but the subtext was legal ammunition. Words that could be twisted, snipped, and presented out of context in a courtroom if I let them. I do my own. Grocery shopping, pay my bills on time, and file my taxes by hand, I said. Do. You need me to retrieve my last 3 utility statements? He smiled again, thinner this time. I continued. While we're at it, would you like a copy of my latest blood panel or the real estate filings I reviewed just this week? He adjusted his collar. I leaned forward. Dr. Keel, let's not pretend you showed. Up out of the blue. Someone sent you. And I'm willing to guess, based on the nature of your check-in, that you're billing either Joel or his legal counsel, which means this is not a wellness check. This is an evaluation, attempt, possibly even a pretext for guardianship proceedings. He hesitated. I'm not at liberty to, I didn't ask for confirmation, I said gently. But I did record this conversation from the moment you identified yourself at the door, including your acknowledgement that I didn't request your services. His face dropped just enough for the performance to falter. I'll be forwarding the recording, I continued, to Mr. Caldwell, my attorney, and to the state board that governs ethics for psychological assessments in cases involving elder care. If I find your name associated with any report that questions my capacity, I will request a formal investigation into your licensing and your relationship with my son-in-law. He stood up, clearing his throat. There's no need to escalate. There's no need to stay, I said calmly. The door is right behind you. He opened his mouth again, perhaps to salvage his script, but I was already standing. He left, quietly. I closed the door and locked it. Then I sat back down and opened my laptop. The recording transferred smoothly. I included a short note to Mr. Caldwell attaching the audio file and a bullet point summary of the interaction. I also blind copied Nora, who had worked for 30 years in family mediation and once told me, any visit not agreed to in writing is an ambush. The next morning, I received an email from Mr. Caldwell. Received. You handled this perfectly. I'll begin the formal documentation trail today. I exhaled, not from fear, but release. I had feared for my peace, for my memory, for the parts of myself that might be questioned, chipped at, erased, but not anymore. If they wanted to wage war in silence, so be it. I had learned how to be silent too, except my silence was full of documentation, backup, dates, and receipts. They had underestimated the wrong woman. That afternoon, I added another note to my kitchen wall beside, the yellow one about forgotten texts. This one read, Smile politely, record. Everything. The envelope came by certified mail, thick, heavy. My name. Typed in stiff uppercase, a return address I didn't recognize. I signed for it, thanked the courier, and closed the door gently behind me. The weight in my hands told me it wasn't a birthday card or a notice from the library. I opened it at the kitchen counter, where the morning light caught the fine print and made it feel colder than it already was. Petition for guardianship, it began. The petitioner, Joel Pierce. I read the pages slowly, methodically, as though it were someone else's name typed on the lines, someone else whose competence had been questioned, whose signature was now a point of legal contention. He had claimed I was no longer able to manage financial responsibilities and potentially vulnerable to neglect. And there were suggestions, carefully worded, just vague enough to slip through, that I'd been confused about mortgage documents, that I no longer maintained clear records, and that I had exhibited signs of cognitive decline in recent months. It was clinical, sanitized, as though my life were a misfiled account that needed administrative correction. He didn't even sign it with a personal note, just Joel E. Pierce with an address I'd once helped pay the down payment on. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the clock tick behind me, while my tea went cold, and the birds outside chirped into the silence. Then I walked into the study, opened my legal folder, and pulled out the small USB drive Mr. Caldwell had given me. I plugged it in. Labeled at the top of the list was the audio file. The 14th of April. Living room, wave, I clicked play. Joel's voice filled the room, clear, unhurried. Recorded from my purse during a visit 2 months ago when he thought I was dozing off in the rocker while he whispered with Abby in the hallway. "Once the house is ours," he said, "we can take care of the rest." Abby's voice was muffled, but audible. "Are you sure she won't push back?" Joel had laughed low and short. "She's already signed half the stuff. She thinks it's for insurance. She's slow now, just don't spook her. The rest was even worse. But I didn't need more than that." I printed the transcript, clipped it to a letter from Caldwell, and added it to the formal response to petition we'd been preparing because we had known this was coming. The unannounced mental health evaluation hadn't been a one-off. It had been a probe. They were testing how far they could push. By the time I arrived at Caldwell's office, the documents were already being copied and collated. His assistant handed me a fresh folder, marked emergency motion to dismiss, and nodded with quiet respect. At the courthouse, I sat silently beside Caldwell as Joel walked in, pressed suit, and too much cologne. He avoided my eyes. Abby was not with him. When the judge asked if there was any supplemental evidence to review before the hearing began, Caldwell stood, calmly. "Yes, Your Honor, we request the court listen to a brief audio excerpt relevant to the petitioner's stated motives." He pressed play. Joel's voice echoed through the courtroom, confident, self-assured, a man who thought no one was listening. "Once the house is ours," it was all we needed. The judge's expression didn't shift, but the clerk paused in her typing. Joel fidgeted in, his chair suddenly smaller. When it ended, Caldwell handed over the transcript and our written rebuttal, citing my financial records, physician letters, property documents, and a notarized statement from Nora confirming I'd maintained my daily life independently. The judge cleared his throat. "Unless the petitioner wishes to provide a compelling counter-narrative," he said, "I believe we have enough here to determine both motive and capacity." Joel tried to speak, but the words came out half-formed. It was a misunderstanding." The judge held up a hand. "This is not a custody dispute, Mr. Pierce. This is an attempt to strip legal agency from a fully competent adult, a grave matter, and one I take seriously." He turned to me. "Mrs. Ellsworth, do you feel safe in your current residence?" I met his eyes. "I do. Now." He nodded. "Petition denied with prejudice, and I strongly advise all parties involved to consider the weight of false claims when pursuing court action in the future." It was over in 20 minutes, but it had been building for months. Outside the courthouse, Joel caught up to me. His tone was low, urgent, but without the mask this time. I have to make it public," he hissed. "That recording?" I looked at him, not angry, not afraid. "Just done." "You didn't have to file that petition," I replied. "But you did." He stepped back, blinking. I turned and walked toward the parking. A lot. Not rushing, not triumphant, just steady. Some things once revealed can't be hidden again, and some people once seen clearly can't be unseen. Joel had wanted control. What he gave me instead was clarity. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature but in tone. Sterile, high ceilings, polished wood that gleamed under fluorescent lights. I had never been inside one before, not for anything personal. The room carried the faint perfume of old paper and varnish, as though every surface had been waiting years just to be spoken into record. "Beside me, mister." Caldwell adjusted his glasses, his yellow legal pad already filled with sharp notes. He leaned closer and whispered, "Breathe, like it's just another morning in your garden." I smiled faintly. My hands rested on the table, steady, unclenched. The battle had already been prepared, the documents filed, the motions submitted. I wasn't here to defend my worth. I was here to declare it. Across the aisle sat Joel, his suit darker than last time, jaw set into a grimace that seemed rehearsed. Beside him, Abby looked smaller than I had ever seen her, eyes pinned to the table, unable to meet mine. Weeks of silence between us, and yet, here she was. The bailiff's voice cut the air. "All rise." The judge entered, robe flowing, face unreadable. He studied the docket, then the counsel tables. This is the matter of guardianship concerning Mrs. Rosemary Ellsworth. Petitioner, Mr. Joel Pierce. His gaze lifted, heavy as a gavel. Mr. Caldwell, your opening remarks? Caldwell stood with calm precision. Yes, Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate not only the full capacity of Mrs. Ellsworth, but also a disturbing pattern of financial coercion by the petitioner. This case is not about decline, it is about design, calculated intent, preying on silence. The judge's eyebrow lifted. Proceed. One by one, the evidence unfurled. Medical letters confirming my cognitive health, bank records showing my bills paid, my accounts balanced, notarized statements from neighbors and friends. She walks every morning. She runs book club. She fixed my hose better than my husband ever could. A ripple of laughter broke through the courtroom, small but cutting. Joel didn't laugh. Then the recordings played. His voice filled the room. Once the house is ours. The judge's face did not shift. It didn't have to. I hadn't planned to speak, but when the chance came, I rose. Your Honor, I said, voice steady, unhurried, I am not here because I lost control of my life. I am here because I chose to protect it. I may be a widow, I may be 71, but I know what a signature means, and I know when someone is trying to take what isn't theirs. Joel stirred, but the ground beneath him was cracking. Caldwell struck next, precise as a scalpel. Was it the same day she transferred $14,000 for your wife's surgery? Joel flushed. She offered, we were family. And yet you filed for full guardianship over that same family. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Pierce, did you inform Mrs. Ellsworth before transferring the deed of her home? Joel hesitated. We discussed it. Did you receive her explicit consent in writing separate from bundled paperwork? Silence. Abby shifted. The judge turned. Mrs. Pierce, do you wish to speak? Her voice trembled at first, but then clear. Yes, Your Honor. I thought the forms were refinancing. Joel told me his mother wanted to help with our mortgage, that it was her gift. But then the house went under our names. It was always her money. He told me she wouldn't remember, that she wouldn't notice. And I believed him. I was wrong. The courtroom stilled. The judge's pen tapped once. Are you saying you were coerced into a fraudulent transfer of ownership? Abby nodded. Yes, and I want to withdraw my name from the petition. Joel's chair screeched as he leapt up. Abby, what are you doing? But she did not flinch. I should have come forward sooner. I am sorry. The judge folded his hands. Statement entered into record. This court thanks you. His gaze turned, sharp as iron. Mr. Pierce, I see no need for further deliberation. Then his eyes softened toward me. Mrs. Ellsworth, you are not only mentally sound, you are legally unbreakable. The words struck not as a verdict, but as a release. My shoulders eased, breath returned. It wasn't just the dismissal of Joel's claims, it was the restoration of my name. Joel stormed out. Abby lingered, approaching with a face carved in regret. I don't expect forgiveness, she whispered, but I never meant to hurt you. I studied her, my daughter, once the girl I had baked animal-shaped cakes for every year. You didn't have to be like him, I said softly, but I'm glad at least today you weren't. She nodded. Then she left. Caldwell and I stepped out into the afternoon Sunday. The courthouse steps were steep, but my stride did not falter. You did more than win a case today, he said. You proved your silence will never be mistaken for weakness again. The sky was cloudless. The air felt changed, not lighter, but clearer. That day, I didn't just reclaim my house, I reclaimed my voice, from the moving truck rumbling away, to planting tulips and sunflowers in a new garden, to Harold's letter framed by my bedside. Everything that followed became not an afterthought, but a resurrection. A smaller home, a conscious life, a legacy written on my own terms. Letters sent without expectation, donations given without leverage, photographs capturing the proof that even ordinary things can be luminous after abandonment. And one evening, as the sky deepened into lavender, I stood beneath the rose trellis I had rebuilt by hand. The air smelled of time and hope. I lifted my camera and clicked without looking through the lens. The photo came out blurred at the edges, but full of light. It was imperfect. It was mine, and it was enough.